Okay, well, welcome everyone. Thank you so much for coming. This is our fifth talk in this series, Why Can't Schools Be More Awesome for Everyone? Talks for Vanier teachers and for SAGEP teachers. Nick is at the college at Hunsick, so we're happy to have you. And tonight, the theme of our talk is meaningful and scalable change possible in education? We have Dr. Michael Canuel presenting to us tonight. He is the CEO of Learn, and he is also the co-founder of the Canadian e-learning network and the co-founder of the Next School Initiative. And he was actually just made a member of the Ordre de l'Excellence en Éducation du Québec. He's going to be talking to us for a little while at the beginning, and then we'll go into a Q&A session. So without further ado, Michael, I turn it over to you, and great presentation.
Thanks so much, Avery. Appreciate it. It's a real pleasure to be here this evening and to have a chance to share with you my thoughts on the whole topic of educational change and whether it's meaningful or scalable or not. So we'll go right away to sharing my screen. And if you can just let me know that you're seeing it. Is that good? Can you guys see it? All right, thanks. So as I said, the question or the theme that I brought up in discussion with Avery was really a matter of change in education, and has it really happened, and is it likely to anytime soon? Now, I did this presentation about a month ago to students at McGill University in their educational leadership program, and I have to warn you in advance that the reviews were mixed. They didn't like my message because it just didn't seem to align with their particular thoughts on where education is right now. So as I go along, if you have any questions or want to challenge me on this, I'm really open for this. I'm also the president of a new organization that I set up with my friend in Newfoundland, and we call ourselves COBS, and I'm the co-founder and current co-president. And COBS stands for Cranky Old Bastard, and you'll come to understand why I take that as I go along. So let's start with the first thing: food for thought. Because we're talking about change. Says, consider how hard it is to change yourself, and you'll understand what little chance you have in trying to change others. Well, think about January 1st, New Year's resolutions. I'm not going to do this. I'm not going to do that. I'm going to go to the gym. Well, we know how long those things last. And then when we all know about a spousal modification. Gee, I wish my wife or my husband or my significant other would do this. And if I do this, they'll change. Truth of the matter is, change is fundamentally hard at almost any level. And when we start to talk about education, it's just that much more complicated. Now, those of you in the world of education are probably familiar with Michael Fullan. He's a little bit of a guru, a Canadian guru, when it comes to things, educational change in general. And he wrote in one of his books, organizational change is the process of moving from the present or current operational phase into the next and advanced functional phase. This process is very difficult as there are barriers of change. It would be change to change, but anyway. So my comment on that was, well, that's kind of, yeah, hello. It's moving from one thing to another. That's change, and it's difficult. Well, no kidding, Sherlock. It's difficult because there are barriers. Yeah. Well, let's maybe go a little deeper and see if we can understand a little bit more about what we talk about when we're talking about change. And there are many definitions. You've got strategic change, you've got people-centric change, structural change, technological change, unplanned change, which is my favorite, and remedial change. If we're looking at education, it probably touches on all of these things. We've seen a little bit in all of them, in all of these areas. We're constantly trying to fix things up. We go math, new math, revised math, unplanned change. Well, it seems like that's what's happening every day. We had the introduction of the internet, a little bit of technology coming to classes, structural changes, a little bit here and there, people-centric change. I'm not sure where that fits in, but strategic change, and again, not too sure, but we'll see. These are some of the definitions that you'll see in the textbooks. Well, here's what change is not, what it ain't in education. it's not window dressing and fireworks. If you go into school boards, and I'm really, and when I talk about education, I should be maybe be a little more precise. I work and operate mostly at the elementary and high school levels, and most of our work is done with them, with educators and students at that level. And when I hear them talking about education, well, they say, well, we've got iPads now, we've got interactive whiteboards, and we've got computers and internet and search engines, and some of the classrooms are pretty fancy, and they've got some flexible class schedules, some classroom projects. Based learning is very popular. We've got school projects, and then of course ministerial directives. And I don't know how familiar you are with that, but every week we get new directives from the ministry saying, well, here's what we should be doing, and here's how we should be doing it, and then they drop that and move to something else. But it's certainly, that's not change, and I'll tell you why. Because it doesn't last, and I'm not sure how meaningful it is. When I say it's fireworks, it's because they're pretty while it lasts, but it doesn't last that long. If you go to a lot of the school boards, what the directors general and the directors of pedagogical services love to do is they bring you to their showcase schools or their showcase classrooms, and they'll have maybe one in their school board out of 20 schools or something like that, and they'll show you all the wonderful things they're doing in that school. But it never lasts. It doesn't last because as often as not, it's not worked into the system, and it's too dependent on a group of teachers or a principal who's really a go-getter. It just seemed to work. But that's what we like to present as change. And I think we know that if we look at the use of computers in the schools, go into most high schools right now, and you'll see that they're not being used that much. Our interactive whiteboards, well, that we spent $250 million here in Quebec putting into place, they're now just being used as blackboards. I mean, I don't know why we spent that money if we're going to use them just as blackboards instead of writing chalk on a blackboard. It's now dry erasable on whiteboards. It doesn't make any sense. That's not change. So really, maybe I'd like to ask you, where our audience, where have any of you seen real change that's both sustainable and scalable in our schools lately?
Well,
I mean, I think
I was
going to say, I think one thing that I was involved in, well, two things actually. One was moving to a portfolio system, kind of a la Nancy Atwell from back in the 80s, and I think that had some significant effects, although it might fall under that idea of, just like a small group of people. It's not necessarily the large systemic or organizational change. And then I think the other thing, kind of more recently, although we're talking like 2014, 2015, is active learning and flipped classrooms. So where some of the technology was not the point, although some people would take that as the point, but the things that we could do with that technology to become, have the students, give them the means of production, so to speak. So those would be my two.
Thanks, Bruce, and I appreciate that. I think that they're both what I'm going to put into the scale of like their showcase things, but they haven't scaled, have they? I think digital portfolios really, for example, and our portfolios generally are an outstanding tool for both metacognitive development of students, for evaluation purposes, and formative evaluation is what I really mean here. So I think it has a lot of value. But if we go through most of our schools, I don't see too many of those. And back in 2012, I think when the Khan Academy really was among the first introducing the flipped class, well, we were doing it, the first ones online, and we won all kinds of awards doing it. And we still do it today in our online classes, but we have 300 students. Okay, that's 300 students. I'm not sure that it's happening in many places. It doesn't mean it shouldn't be happening. So what I'm saying, I would love to see the use of portfolios everywhere. I would love to see flipped classes everywhere, but it's just not happening. It's really not happening in our schools. What does it mean for it to be sustainable and scalable?
That's jump in on your last point there.
Yes, please do. Please do.
So, look, I don't want to be a cheerleader or get too excited about
Please, I
change.
want you to be a cheerleader.
No, I see change happening very, very slowly. But one change that I have seen that has been quite significant is at least the attempt to provide students with an evaluation grid. That is to say, the teachers now, in the past, I'd say 10 years, feel responsible for justifying the grades that they give. They can't just put a B at the top of the page and claim, well, I'm an expert. They actually have to justify and provide some analysis of how they arrived at that grade. And I see that as being quite widespread. I would say it's pretty standard now. Correct me if I'm wrong.
I think you're not entirely wrong. What I would come back and say to you in this case, and again, it's a good thing. It's not. I'm not saying it's not a good thing, but what I'm saying is that it's a reactive. It's like, what are we evaluating? You know, if we're saying you got to come back, as most of our exams in our high schools are right now, they're mostly they don't create or provide a real insight into what learning has occurred. It's still a large part of it is memory. A large part of it, especially unfortunately, mostly in the sciences, it's memory, it's recall, it's just going over what you've done. The chemistry, physics classes are very much like that. So even though the teachers have to justify what they're teaching, the question is, how are they teaching it? And what we also know is, again, research is very clear, is that if you give the same exam to the kids who took it and got an A in June, and you give it to them in September, a lot of them are going to struggle to pass that exam because they haven't really learned it. They prepared for an exam, and they now know how to play the system effectively. But I would say to you, yes, look, I want to see good evaluation and meaningful evaluation, but and yes, the teachers should have to justify it. But I'll say, what are we really teaching?
Display, right? I mean,
yes,
we're teaching our students to display a series of skills that they're carefully prepared for, but as you say, are not fully integrated into their knowledge or their skills.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, and again, it's a good point you're bringing up, because most people don't even know what it means to learn. You know, like very often they think learning is I remember something and I'm able to give it back to you. I remember something. Remembering is not learning. Learning is when you change behavior, when you do something differently as a result of what you've told. So I'm, again, a firm believer in competency-based education, skills-based learning, and I do see it in spots here and there. But we have a long way to go before we get there. It's not sustainable in many cases because we find all kinds of reasons not to do it. And it's not scalable in many cases because, again, for a lot of the same reasons that I was mentioning, it requires something that people aren't ready to give to make it happen. And if I said, what are the most meaningful changes that have occurred in education in the last 50 years? Well, first thing that come to mind, well, we now have access to the internet. We have cellular phones that make a difference. We have, again, introduction of search engines, so on and so forth. But go into our schools and you'll see that most of the classrooms, the vast majority of our schools still don't function with computers. The vast majority don't. I'm in high schools, and I'm thinking mostly high schools, and there are exceptions, you know, and I don't want to talk about the exceptions because that's what they are, exceptions. It's 10 to 15%, but the vast majority don't have computers, and they don't, and those who use them, as often as not, it's just for search and collect information as opposed to effective applications. So we have brought new tools into the environment, but I'm not convinced that we're using them very effectively. This is a character from Charles Dickens' book called Hard Times. He wrote it in 1854. And the name of the teacher was Thomas Gradgrind. So you can see, obviously, the play on words, gradually grinding down the kids. And he said he was a kind of cannon loaded to the muzzle with facts and ready to blow. them clean out of the regions of childhood at one discharge. And that sounds like a pretty harsh indictment of education in one sense. And that was Charles Dickens back in 1854. But the question is, have things really changed all that much? And I'm going to answer my own question. I'll let you jump in here. If you do an internet search right now on Google, and you say, show me an image of a student in a classroom, here's what you get: 86 out of 100 and 10 out of 14. Now, what do those numbers mean? And I'll spare you the time and the energy, unless you want to guess.
Well, you can have the 86 out of 100. That's my percentage, and 10 out of 14 could be my ranking.
No, 86 out of 100 images coming out of the internet show the kids sitting in a classroom staring up forward to the teacher. All right, they're all sitting in a classroom in nice, neat little rows, and the teacher's like the cannon loaded to the muzzle with facts, ready to blow them out of their ignorance with all the information he has. That's 86 out of 100. If you look at news shows, whenever they show clips of a classroom in the news, they always show a teacher standing in the front of a classroom, and the students are in nice, neat little rows. And a teacher's done a good job if he's done good classroom management, and everyone is in these nice, neat little rows. I've walked into high schools, and many, if not most, most actually, still have the teacher standing in the front, doing exactly that, the didactic model. And so a little quote here from Chalkboard says, our reliance on lectures is the most glaring example of the problems plaguing education. Lectures are so futile that it would feel foolish describing their inadequacies if they were not so pervasive. Everyone recognizes the basic lecture model. A teacher stands in front of the room while students sit quietly taking notes. And it's happening, and it's pervasive. It's an epidemic, pandemic. It's just there. It's happening. And we like to delude ourselves sometimes by thinking it's not, but it's there and it's happening. And it's still the majority situation. Now, if you want to change things in education, you can't do it by yourself. It cannot be a teacher or a group of teachers or a group of teachers with some students doing it. Now, hopefully, and this is where Avery and I have had some very big debates along this. And I think your philosophy, Avery, was that if we can get a small model going, we can build off that model and then grow it. And God, I hope you're right, and that's the way we can end up doing it. I'm skeptical, because I think to make real change, to make it scalable and sustainable, you need to have everyone on board. You need to have the politicians, the bureaucrats, the administrators, the teachers unions, the parents, and the students committed to doing all this. The politicians have to see that there's a time and a place to change, and we need to do it now. Well, I mean, if we're not doing it now, we're such deep trouble as it is. But the politicians aren't going to do it because most parents don't really understand all of this. It's a little bit difficult for them. The bureaucrats, well, again, it requires changing policies and changing a whole bunch of things. I haven't seen anything innovative coming out of any bureaucracy at any time lately. Same thing with administrators, teachers unions. It's all the same thing. Everyone has a lot of good intentions, and I think good intentions are wonderful, but well, it's not enough. Everyone recognizes the need to change. Everyone wants to see change happen, and we generally all know we need to change, but as a rule, we don't. We play around the fringes of things, but we don't really get to that truly scalable change where every school operates as it should be, where the student is truly at the center of the learning process. And that's just not happening. Why? Well, some obvious answers. Because it's hard. It's hard. It's really hard. I mean, it's not easy to do this. And you got to really stick to it. You got to persevere. And not everyone's ready to put in the effort. That's just the truth. You need lots of work and you need lots of effort. And you've got to stick to it. You got to stick to it. You got to stick to it. It won't happen in a month, in a semester or a year. It's almost a generational thing. But who plans in a generational fashion anymore? And to do that, you need to have everyone, all the players on board saying this. Of course, one of my favorite ones, because I've worked with so many teachers and we just don't have the time. We don't have the time. I'd love to do it, Michael. This is a great idea. We'd like to change everything we're doing, but we won't do it. And then, of course, there's permission. Well, the faculty won't allow me. The school won't allow me. The ministry won't allow me. It's against the rules. It's not in the contract. That's my favorite one, too. It's not in the contract. I'm only supposed to do so many hours and I can only do so many things. That one gets me a little bit going, my blood pressure rises when it comes to that. So it's when I hear all these things, I go, yeah, okay. And I'm sure there are lots of other excuses as to why we really don't have systemic change, deep and meaningful change, and not just little things here and there that they're all laudable. I'm never going to criticize anyone trying to make their classroom better, but I want to see it everywhere. If someone's doing it right in one place and another's not doing it, it's hard to say. So this is where I always get into trouble, because I say, knowing it's wrong but still doing it. Is it child abuse? I don't know. I mean, like, I'm not saying it is. It's a question. But if you know you're doing harm to a child, but you keep on doing it, is it criminal? Well, if it was not in the classroom, I don't know. Have we normalized dysfunctionality? In other words, it's okay to knowingly do something that's not in the best interest of the kids and just keep on doing it because, well, it's just the way we've always done it this way. I have grandchildren. And the best example I give is always a quick little anecdote. But my granddaughter, who came here a couple of years ago, and before she started grade 1, and I have a big backyard and it's wooded in the back. And she took me by the hand and she said, okay, grandfather, we're going to walk through the woods here. And she was picturing all these dinosaurs and flying around and walking around. And she said, put your arm out. I said, why? She says, because there's a baby pterodactyl that's going to land on your arm. And I said, oh, that's really cool. And in her mind, it was all happening. It was all real. And then I realized that in a week from now, she was going to start school. And she goes to a school, French school, not just English, French doesn't matter, where they started to drill down or work her down so that that level of creativity is gone. Children before they go to school smile, I forget how many times a day. And once they start going to school, they smile less and less every year. Something's wrong with what we're doing in our schools. Everyone thinks of changing the world, but no one thinks of changing himself. It's one of those platitudes that I just wanted to throw in there at the end, because I'm frustrated because we need to change, but I just don't see it happening anytime soon. So is it meaningful change that's scalable and sustainable possible? The answer, unfortunately, is no, not anytime soon. Thanks for your time. I was told that this was a very uplifting presentation in the past, but in a very facetious way. So,
well, I don't think there's any problem with it being uplifting. I think it's true. I think that there's for people who are interested in schools and not committing a criminal act with children and trying to have them be creative and trying to have them be happy and excited about learning. I don't think that this is. I mean, I think this is uplifting in the sense that we're talking about this and we're saying it out loud because a lot of people just don't say it. Yeah. The thing I would say, I mean, you were talking about this earlier in terms of the characterization of me looking at this from bottom up. I understand that we have to have a top down. We also have to have a bottom up approach in terms of what works. And one of the people who came and talked, she's part of Building 21, which is a competency-based school. All projects are transdisciplinary. All the academic and the 21st century competencies are laid out on a grid, just like Nick was talking about. But the grid is a 4-year grid. The kids go through it the entire 4 years. It's very much like the SOAR school that you and I, Michael, had a chance to talk with their CEO. Very much like the lab schools for the Khan Academy. The idea is that change, there is sustainable change. These schools are proof of it, but like you said, there's few of them. We're talking about the number of schools that are doing this in North America, probably around 75. But that change is sustainable. Those schools function like that all the time. The parents get used to those types of schools. The kids come out, totally ready for life. Incredible writers, totally excited about reading and living life. So it is possible. The issue is how do you scale that, and that is the hard part. So I do think that change is can be sustainable, but it is definitely not scalable. So I think that there's
Yeah,
that element.
and I agree with you entirely. I think we've got great models that we can build off. We see some amazing things going on in New Zealand. We see some amazing things happening in Finland. But and I'm not saying that those models can be easily transferred here. I'm not suggesting that. But they only happened, and I look at Finland in particular, it only happened because everyone got involved in it. It was a holistic approach. And I'm definitely not for a top-down approach, and I'm definitely not for a strictly bottom-up approach. I think you need to get all the players involved in the game. You got to get them at the table, talking to one another, and assessing all these things. A little earlier, we were talking about generative AI. I asked ChatGPT 4 yesterday. I said, build me a rubric on how I could, and give me those criteria that you would use to evaluate a student's effective and ethical use of generative AI. It gave me all the criteria and built up a rubric that was phenomenal. My point is simply that as we have a tool now that I think is a game changer, and unfortunately in education, change doesn't seem to want to ever come from within. And now I think there might be external forces that are kind of come into play that will absolutely impose change that people aren't necessarily comfortable with. Not saying it's going to happen today or tomorrow, but it's going to happen. Yeah, Nicholas.
Yeah, I just, I wanted to jump in earlier, but
I'm sorry. Yeah, you should.
No, it's okay. I mean, I
was on a roll.
I want you to know that even if your talk isn't so very uplifting in terms of emotional sense, I think facts are more important than my feelings about those facts. I agree with you. I saw an article on the wall of my cégep, that's my college, that said that 63% of the students at college get a diploma by the end, which means 37 drop out. 37% of our clientele are dropping out of college. They don't see the point in finishing it. So that was in 2019. It's very worrying for me. One solution that I strongly believe in, and I have tried to, get Avery on board and others on board with this, is when I was in South Korea teaching at a school, I noticed that when we got a better set of materials in, better set of books in, the classes improved and the teachers improved and their methods improved. So it's my opinion that improving materials is one route to improving education, not in like profoundly fundamental ways, but in small but significant ways, right? For example, preparing a student-centered lesson is a lot easier when your materials support or recommend those kinds of activities, right? And ChatGPT, this large language model, generative AI, I believe is going to inform a whole new swathe of interesting materials that students can interact with for research, for generating, for thinking, for sharing, for personalizing, with like dynamic lessons and dynamic feedback in so many interesting ways. So yeah. Would you say that materials might have an impact on?
I think one of the things that we used to talk about was Stark. We talked about the space in which the learning happens, which has an impact on it. So that's one factor. Then there was a temporal component to a driver to educational change. In other words, when you're doing it, the time that you spend on it. Like in other words, if you're giving a class and you've got an hour to do it or 2 hours to give a class, sometimes you might want to have only 10 minutes, but other times you might want to have a whole day to work on it. So we need to look at schedules that reflect the learning process and not be arbitrarily designed and say, well, you got 90 minutes, because that 90 minutes can interfere. Then you get into the pedagogy, and that includes a lot of your tools that you bring into play. You're 1000% right. The tools that you use, be it the technology, be it a book. Yeah, imagine a book, with paper. It's a very powerful tool used correctly. See, I think we have so many opportunities and things we can work with. Those are important. We also have to look at relational issues. Like what's the role of the teacher in here? You know, okay, I don't want to say the teacher stands completely to the side and does nothing, but you know what, the idea of the didactic model, I mean, how many times do we have to be hit over the head and being told it doesn't work? So we need to modify this and adjust it. And then, of course, we have to look at the community. Everyone has a role to play in education. So these are the drivers for educational change that come into play. And I think that they're all critical. But you can't just take just one, you know, and I think books are part of it. Then you got to make sure that your teachers know what to do with the books. And you were talking about building skills. Well, if the book becomes a tool that's used in developing a competency or a better understanding that helps them lead to better critical thinking, developing all those 21st century skills that we keep talking about, we've been talking about for 2 decades now. I think that's great. But we have to look at a systemic approach to things. We can't just look at one little thing. It's all it's intertwined. It's a chain, and we have to imagine change happening that way. And as I said, I love hearing about these wonderful examples. What frustrates me is how isolated they are, you know. And when we have these great things happening and they're not scalable, it means that who's getting taking advantage of it. And I'll be honest with you, 9 times out of 10, they're the kids who are already privileged, you know, who are in a situation where they're able to take advantage of it. And the kids who are less fortunate can't be doing their flipped classes from home because they don't have a computer at home, they don't have bandwidth, they don't have whatever, because that's still a reality for many. So we have to be looking for not just sustainable, but also scalable solutions that work for everyone, so that we don't have an exclusive or elitist type of education.
Yeah, and I think that kids know when the learning is fake. I think they know when the learning is low level. They know, you know, if you ask the kids, you know, would they cheat if they could, if they knew they weren't going to get caught? A lot of them would say, yeah, because we have an R score, for instance, at the SAGE. They want to get a good R score, even if they don't really know exactly why they're getting a good R score.
Yeah.
So they know that learning is fake. The thing that's really interesting, if you take language learning, for instance, and you look at what ChatGPT could do, I mean, ChatGPT is pretty amazing for language learning. I mean, right now you don't have the text-to-speech, speech-to-text kind of part to it. You will have that soon, but it can correct your writing. It's going to be able to correct your speaking. It's going to be able to give you vocabulary, grammar, appropriate input to be able to listen to and to be able to read. It's going to start to be real learning. And I think what's going to happen is I think kids are going to start to have like your little, you know, personal learning assistant or whatever it is, Conmigo, or they're going to have some kind of language learning tool. And the kids are going to start to feel, wow, this is what real learning is like. Now, obviously, that's still siloed. I'm still working in my language learning type of mode. And I'm not getting a transdisciplinary project that doesn't have necessarily real world impact. But I think when kids start to feel like, wow, that's really interesting, I think that some kids are going to start to say, well, how do I mix that in with this, some kind of learning module where I get credit, or maybe I don't even want credit. Maybe I just want to learn things on my own and kind of go off on my own way. So I think you're going to have a fragmentation of the entire system. And I think that ChatGPT, like you said, we've always waited for kind of an outside, you know, thunderclap to come in and make a change. And I think what's interesting about that is that it's going to happen, but I don't think teachers realize how competitive ChatGPT is going to start to get, and how much kids are going to really like to work with ChatGPT. Obviously not in its base form now, but in its kind of advanced form where it's more personal, and that's coming soon. And that's coming like in 12 months, maybe 18 months if things go slowly.
I think, and I'm probably a little off on the numbers, but I think in the first week that ChatGPT was out, it was used by 10,000 people, but at the end of the first month, it was already been used by 1 million, you know, and now we're like 5-6 months in, so the use is crazy. But here's the problem: we're going to get students who will have outpaced the teachers in many cases, because the generative AI is only as good as what your input into it. You know, the questions that you ask it, the syntax that you employ in the questions. Then you have to know how to analyze the response from ChatGPT or whatever, and then you have to be able to drill down and say, okay, fine, you gave me this and I want that. And then after that, you want to be able to say, okay, because we know that it still makes mistakes, that some of the references it provides they're not always accurate. So you need to be able to come back and say, well, hey, how do I know that this is accurate? These are skills that we have to be teaching our kids, but the problem is that our teachers don't even know these things. So our kids need it, because those are the skills that they will be required of them in 5 years from now. Who's going to teach them? So I had someone wrote a blog on for us, about, oh, we have to be careful about it. Yeah, I got it. I get all that. But, we have to get on the bandwagon when it comes to this, because change is going to be forced upon education. And I think that we're on the verge of some significant change, but it won't happen from inside education, unfortunately.
Yeah. Can I just raise a point about impediments to change?
Sure.
One thing that I noticed is, there are colleagues, and there's the institution, and there are the objectives and materials and all these factors that slow us down in implementing, what we believe to be a better education, but also students. You come to a group of students, you say, oh, we're going to do something that's interactive, and you're going to generate the content, and you're going to be involved, and it's going to be narrative, and you're going to love it. It's going to be so fun. When's the midterm? Well, there's no midterm. We're going to generate this, and we're going to collaborate in groups. Oh, okay. Well, I have a part-time job. I won't be able to make it. And the students resist any kind of change because they want the formula, because they're comfortable with the formula, and they fear anything that strays too far from it.
Yeah. Well, again, do we blame the student because they're Pavlovian? It's a Pavlovian effect. They've been trained to think this way. They don't
Worse than trained. They've been punished into this type of learning.
Punished into it. The other thing is that they don't understand, and that we fail to keep mentioning to them, is that learning requires effort. You don't learn without effort. And people say, well, that's it. We've lost them as soon as we say that. When we go to video games, I look at my grandson who plays Minecraft, and let me tell you, he works at it and works at it and works at it and comes back. He's putting in a lot of time and effort to build his things, his world, his Minecraft world. Kids aren't opposed to making an effort, but the effort for them has to be somehow or other meaningful. In many cases, what's happened is that we've made learning not meaningful for them, not authentic. And so when we bring them into a situation where you want to do some great things with them, some interesting and interactive things that will help them build these skills, you're not starting at zero. You're starting at minus 100 because you're fighting all that conditioning, years and years of conditioning. And then when they get there, they say, yeah, what is this going to be on the exam? Is this going to be on the exam? I'm sure we all had asked this question. Is this important? Which was our way of saying, is that on the exam? So yeah, we've conditioned them to do this. So where do we start?
I'd go further, and I'd say that, in fact, when it's a question of autonomy, I think your son feels autonomous in this Minecraft environment, and he gets into the grind, and he develops the skills in order to enjoy the game or enjoy the product of his labor from it. But what students are trained into doing is that they make an effort because the teacher is forcing them. This is the language that my 16-year-old daughter uses. Oh, the teachers are making us do, fill in the blanks or something. So the control, the locus of control is outside of them.
Yeah.
And so when it comes time, it's okay, now there's no control. You're free to make your own mistakes, but also you're free to force yourself to practice, to engage in rehearsal strategies, in creative activities, that sort of thing. That muscle isn't there. They don't know how to force themselves. They're expecting the force, the pressure to come from outside, and when it's removed, they lose their ability to work.
Yeah,
the
but why
reflex
is
is
that?
not there.
Because we've basically conditioned them to become acceptors of what the teacher, and even worse than that, they try to figure out what's in the teacher's head and then give it back. And when you change that, even for a 45-hour class, they're not able to do that. In the schools that we've seen, like the Building 21s, the Lab schools, and the SOAR schools, kids are not like that. They are incredibly engaged. They're ready for real world projects, especially when the projects have real world impact and they're excited about them. The problem is that I've tried it. You cannot take a 45-hour class and change that entire thinking structure in 45 hours. It's just too hard, especially because around the entire class is the wrapper of an R score, grading. Do I have to come to classes and on the test? It's just too hard. So you have to, to work in a school, you have to have the whole school on board, which is already not impossible, but let's say 1 millimeter close to impossible. And then beyond that, if you want to have the larger sustainable change, you have to have everyone on board, like Michael said. So it is very, very complicated.
So, and to do that, where's the God Aya come from? The R code comes from the ministry, and but it reflects societal values and thoughts. And I'll go back to my original point, is that it's a systems change that you need to have. And if you don't have everyone on board, we're just going to keep on doing. I think people are well-intentioned in many cases, but we just keep on doing the same stuff over and over again. And so it's like Sisyphus, you keep rolling it up the hill, but you never get there. You never get there. And so I despair for my grandchildren. I despair for them because I'm afraid that the schools will turn them off, completely learning. I think that if they're not prepared for the future and they don't have those skills, they will be obsolete before they even hit the or I don't obsolete, but they will be non-functional when they're ready to enter society as contributing participants. I have a lot of concerns about this, and part of my motivation is looking at what it's doing to our young people right now. And when they hit the SEJA, unfortunately, you're getting in many cases the results, the cumulative effects of 11 years of mindless, mind-numbing things. And a quick little example: my granddaughter, same thing. I always use my grandkids as examples. Told me she barely ever speaks in school. She said, "I spoke yesterday, but I only for about a minute." She says and that was in a day, in the course of a day. She spoke for a minute. I mean, it's insane. It's insane. But they do come home with lots of homework where they have to practice their récit, their French grammar, and you go, a lot expletive deleted here on all of this, even though research tells us that homework at the elementary level is ineffective and actually counterproductive. We keep on doing it. Like what other profession goes and ignores its own research? It's like, it's insane. Don't get me going, as they say, that that I don't want to go on another rant here, but
Michael, could you just stop sharing your screen so we could have all four of us together?
Sure.
Not that your screen is not amazing. Sorry, I think Nikki wanted to say something.
Yeah, no, I'm just I'm scared and I'm worried about the future of our children. Those kids in schools right now. I am concerned. What you're describing to me, Nick, in your class is really, it's sad. It's really sad. That because where do they go from here? I think in the past, my father, our parents and grandparents, they had a job and it stayed at that company for all of their career. Now people tend to, by forced in many cases, they change 3, 4, 5, 6 times. And now they're saying it's going to be like you're going to stay at a job for 18 months, 24 months, and then you're going to be moving on. So you need to have lifelong learning skills. You got to have all these things, but what are you going to do? You're going to be a lawyer? Well, thank you, but I think ChatGPT is going to take care of that. You want to be an accountant? Well, good luck with that. I just, what jobs are you going to be taking over, and including teaching? I think, I think the teaching is going to, you either adapt or disappear. It's, being adaptive is a key to survival, because we'll have our very friendly avatars that will look very human. They'll be infinitely patient, infinitely knowledgeable, and will rely on research to guide our children through their learning process. So I don't know, who would I rather have? An artificial avatar who's good and stimulating for my kids, or a real person? I don't know. It's a,
That's
I'm not
a
going to say I
good
want that.
question.
I don't want to have that robot in there, necessarily, but because I do crave human contact. But on the other hand, if she's sitting in a classroom not talking,
Only
all day
talking for
long,
1 minute and afraid to talk and having homework, maybe the avatar is better.
Where's the human interaction? Yeah,
I-
Nick, I'm sorry. Guys, stop me at any time. I tend to rant.
No, it's wonderful. But I see two obvious changes that could come from on high that would immediately improve the education system. And one of them occurs to me every tax season, and that is I didn't learn anything about taxes. I didn't learn anything about taxes in school. I learned about geometry, trigonometry, algebra. Not so great at it, but I learned it. But I didn't learn about taxes. And the other thing is, every time I go and, I'm tempted to buy a Lotto 649 scratchy or something, I think, oh, I never really learned about probabilities and statistics.
It's a good thing.
Probably think about that a bit more. So
yeah,
that I think the math curriculum could be adjusted to our real world needs. The second thing is there's a heavy emphasis on argumentation, on preparing arguments, evaluating arguments, supporting arguments, and very little about storytelling, which is how we establish relationships, how we maintain relationships. I noticed that in your talk, there's very little in the way of like facts and statistics. It's a lot. You use the framework of your slides to tell stories, and it's the stories that communicates the need and make your talk so persuasive. And yet we're not taught to do that. We're not taught the language, we're not taught the structure, and we're not taught the need to tell great stories. So those are two, I think, decisions that could come from above and would immediately have a positive impact on schooling.
Yeah.
What do you think?
I think it's a great insight, Nick. The methodology I used for my doctoral dissertation was narrative inquiry, because clearly you're right. It's telling a story comes right out of our nature. It's who we are. It's just what kids do. We put them to sleep by telling them stories. It's just comes naturally, and it's who we are. And you're right. People would rather hear a story than hear a list of facts. But the question is why? And you're right. Rather than getting into all that, I think but why isn't it happening? I guess why aren't we getting our Ministry of Education and our gurus coming out of the faculties of education pushing for this? And again, it's just not happening. Yeah, I don't know. As I said, it's hard to change, and it takes a lot of time and a lot of effort. Yeah, I got all that. But, we have to be putting the interests of our kids ahead of everything else. Not anything. I can't think of anything more important, than putting their interests first and foremost. And somehow or other, they get lost in the mix all the time.
Well, I think that is totally real and maybe it's not uplifting, but I think it's real and I think it's important to be said. I'm glad that we're going to get to put this up on the internet and people are going to get a chance to watch it and listen to it, and sobering, but I agree 100%. I've seen what's really fun is to go to a school that it has, a really wonderful curriculum and have all the teachers buy in and all the students buy in and kids doing real projects and excited about learning and coming out ready for the world. But I mean, other than that, I've never seen a school kind of change halfway. I've never seen a school be able to kind of, have the R score and still be able to be excited about learning. And I think one of those things is you have to kind of flip the switch the entire way. Going to an entire province or an entire country that's made the change. I mean, that's the Finland, and that's super exciting, but that's also hard too. So I think what you bring up tonight, Michael, is totally pertinent. I think it's real, and I think we need to look at ourselves in the mirror, because even though we're ranting about this here and complaining about this, in some ways we're all kind of part of it. I mean, yes, we're not complicit, but we've fought, we've tried, and we have not been as successful as we've all hoped to be. So maybe tomorrow will be different, and things will start to change. But I want to thank you for coming and talking to all of us and being a part of this. And we really appreciate your time. And we'll put this up on the internet. And as I said, let's get 1 million views. Let's get 1 billion views on this, and let's start the conversation.
No, excellent. Thanks so much. I guess you can put it by Debbie Downer here.
Debbie Real. Debbie Real.
Debbie Real. Yeah. Hey, listen, thanks guys for hanging in there. And as I said, I apologize for the rant.
No ranting here. But thank you so much. We are at 8 o'clock, so I don't want to hold people too long. But thank you everyone for coming. That was great. And as I said, we'll put this up online. Thank you, Michael, for your insights. Bruce, Nick, thanks for toughing it out with
Thanks.
us.
Yeah, thanks, Nick.
Yeah.
Thanks. Thank you very much, Michael.
And
All
then,
right, thanks.
Michael, you
Thank
can
Nick.
reach out to Michael if you ever want to have any
Yeah,
more conversations with
absolutely.
him. He's a
Get my
very reachable
Avery has
guy.
my coordinates anytime.
Well, thank you everyone for coming.
Awesome.
Have a great
Thanks.
evening. Bruce, good luck with the stout, and we'll see you guys
Yeah.
later.
Exactly. I
Cheers,
didn't
gents.
see it too often there, Bruce. All right, bye, guys.
Bye, everyone.
Success. Bye, guys. Thanks.